When pilots collapsed at 30,000 feet, Flight 447 was doomed. No passengers knew how to fly. Then two 8-year-old twin girls stood up from row 9. "We can land this plane," they said calmly. What happened next shocked the aviation world forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across Chicago O'Hare Airport as passengers boarded Flight 447 to Denver. Among them were Sarah and Emma Mitchell, 8-year-old identical twins with bright, intelligent eyes and matching aviation-themed backpacks. Sarah clutched a small flight manual while Emma held her favorite toy airplane, a perfect replica of a Boeing 737. Their father, Captain James Mitchell, was an instructor at the Air Force Academy, and these girls had been breathing aviation since they could walk. As they settled into seats 9A and 9B, the twins watched flight attendant Jessica perform the safety demonstration with the intensity of seasoned travelers. Sarah mouthed along with the familiar words while Emma studied the safety card like it contained state secrets. "Remember what Dad taught us about emergency procedures?" Sarah whispered to her sister. Emma nodded solemnly, "Always stay calm. Assess. Act." In the cockpit, Captain Rick Torres, a veteran pilot with 25 years of experience, completed his pre-flight checklist alongside First Officer Mike Chen. "Weather looks good to Denver. Should be a smooth ride," Torres said, reaching for his coffee but wincing slightly as he rubbed his chest. When Chen asked if he was okay, Torres dismissed it as heartburn from too much coffee. Neither man could have imagined that this simple gesture would soon set in motion the most extraordinary emergency landing in aviation history. Flight 447 took off smoothly, climbing into the crystal-clear morning sky. 45 minutes into the flight, cruising peacefully at 30,000 feet, the twins were quietly studying Sarah's flight manual. Sarah pointed to a complex diagram, explaining to Emma how the autopilot handled most of the flying but still required constant monitoring of altitude, heading, and airspeed. "What if something goes wrong with the autopilot?" Emma asked. "Then you switch to manual control," Sarah replied, "but Dad says that's really hard without lots of practice." At that exact moment, Captain Torres suddenly grabbed his chest, his face contorting in agony. "Mike, something's wrong?" he gasped before slumping forward over the controls. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp warning tone that sent ice through Chen's veins. Rick! Chen shouted, frantically checking for a pulse. There was none. He keyed the radio with trembling hands. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Denver Center, Flight 447. We have a medical emergency. Captain is unconscious, But before he could finish, Chen suddenly gasped, clutching his throat. His coffee cup fell, spilling across the console as he collapsed beside his captain. The aircraft, no longer under autopilot control, began a subtle but ominous descent. In the cabin, passengers noticed the slight change in engine sound. Jessica, with her years of experience, immediately sensed something was wrong and headed toward the cockpit. Her knocking on the door received no response, so she used her key to enter. What she found would haunt her dreams forever. Both pilots unconscious, the control yoke unmanned, and warning lights flashing like a Christmas tree gone mad across the instrument panel. "This is Jessica on Flight 447. We have an emergency. Both pilots are down. I repeat, both pilots are unconscious," she radioed, her voice barely controlled as she checked for pulses. Torres was gone and Chen's pulse was weak and irregular. Ground control asked for clarification, but Jessica's response sent chills through the control tower. "Denver Center, Flight 447. Captain appears to have suffered cardiac arrest. First officer is unconscious. We need immediate assistance." When ground control told her to maintain heading, Jessica's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand, there's an 012 fly the plane." Returning to the cabin with a face pale as winter snow, Jessica whispered urgently to flight attendant Mark. "Both pilots are down. Get on the PA and ask if anyone has flight experience. Now." Mark's eyes widened in terror as the full gravity of their situation hit him. Over the PA, trying desperately to sound calm, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. If anyone aboard has flight experience of any kind, please ring your call button immediately." A nervous murmur spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers began looking around anxiously, some standing despite instructions. The businessman in first class demanded to know what kind of technical issue they were experiencing. No call buttons lit up. The plane continued its slow descent, now at 28,500 feet and falling. Mark tried again, his voice more urgent. "This is an emergency announcement. We need anyone with any aviation experience to identify themselves immediately. Panic began to set in like a rising tide. Passengers talked loudly, some ignoring seatbelt signs and standing in the aisles. An elderly woman's voice rose above the chaos. What's happening? Why won't they tell us? A college student pulled off his headphones, asking the question everyone was thinking. Are we going to crash? In row 9, Sarah and Emma exchanged a meaningful look. Sarah gripped her flight manual tighter, her knuckles white with tension. Sarah, should we? Emma whispered. Dad always said only help if no one else can, Sarah whispered back. They looked around the cabin. No call buttons were lit, no hands were raised, no voices were volunteering. The plane shuddered again, more noticeably this time, and Mark made one final desperate plea over the PA. Please, if anyone has even basic flight simulator experience, we need your help now. The silence that followed was deafening. The altitude reading showed 27,800 feet and dropping. That's when Sarah stood up slowly, her small hand reaching for the call button with the determination of someone far beyond her years. Excuse me, she said in a clear, calm voice that cut through the chaos like a knife. Nearby passengers turned to look at the small girl in confusion. Excuse me, Sarah called louder. We can fly. The entire cabin fell silent as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. Jessica rushed over, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. Sweetie, this isn't a game. We need actual pilots, she said gently but firmly. Emma stood beside her sister, her voice steady and confident. Our dad is Captain James Mitchell. He teaches at the Air Force Academy. He's been training us since we were 5. The businessman in first class stood up, his voice incredulous. You want to let children fly the plane? Sarah looked up at him with eyes that held more composure than most adults could muster in a crisis. We know the Boeing 737 systems. We've logged over 200 hours in Dad's home simulator. We know emergency procedures. Jessica looked around the cabin desperately. Does anyone else have any flight experience? The silence was her answer. The plane continued descending, 26,900 feet and falling like a stone with wings. Emma stepped forward, her voice carrying an urgency that belied her age. Ma'am, every second we wait, we lose more altitude. If we don't level off soon, we'll be too low to recover. Jessica stared at the girls, seeing something extraordinary in their eyes, a depth of knowledge and calm that seemed impossible for children their age. Sarah opened her flight manual to a systems diagram. This is a Boeing 737-800, right? Twin-engine, fly-by-wire system with 3 hydraulic systems and manual reversion capability. Jessica's jaw dropped. These weren't ordinary children making wild claims, they were speaking the technical language of professional aviators. Ground control, this is Jessica on Flight 447, she radioed, her voice shaking. We have 2 passengers who claim flight training. They're children, but they seem to know aircraft systems. The response crackled back. Flight 447, confirm, children? Jessica confirmed, and after a pause that seemed to last forever, ground control announced they were patching in Captain James Mitchell from the Air Force Academy. When their father's voice came through the radio, emotional but steady, the twins' eyes lit up like beacons. Sarah? Emma? Is that you angels? Sarah took the radio with hands that didn't shake. Hi, Daddy. We're at 26,500 feet and descending. Both pilots are unconscious. What do we do? Her father's response would become legendary in aviation circles. Okay, angels. Remember what we practiced. Sarah, you take primary controls. Emma, you monitor instruments. Can you get to the cockpit? Jessica led the twins into the cockpit as other passengers crowded the aisle behind them, watching in disbelief and growing hope. The girls climbed into the pilot seats, adjusting them upward with the practiced efficiency of experienced aviators. Their feet barely reached the rudder pedals, but their hands moved to the controls with confidence that defied their age. Sarah took the captain's seat while Emma positioned herself as first officer. Dad, we're in position, Sarah reported into the radio. Autopilot is disengaged. Current altitude 26,200 feet, airspeed 320 knots, heading 270. Her father's voice guided them through the first critical step. Perfect, Angel. First, engage the autopilot. Big white button marked A/P on the mode control panel. Sarah reached up and pressed the button, and miraculously the plane leveled off. Autopilot engaged. We're level at 26,000 feet, she announced, prompting a collective sigh of relief from the passengers. Captain Mitchell's voice continued the guidance. Good girls. Now, Emma, Check engine parameters on the engine indication and crew alerting system display. Emma studied the complex screen with the focus of a seasoned pilot. Both engines showing normal parameters. Oil pressure good, EGT within limits, fuel flow normal. Behind them, the businessman who had initially scoffed turned to another passenger. Those kids know more about flying than I know about my own car. In the cabin, passengers gathered around the cockpit entrance, their panic transformed into amazement and hope. The elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes. Those little angels, they're going to save us all. A college student filmed with his phone, whispering, "This is unbelievable." 8-year-olds flying a commercial jet. Captain Mitchell's voice took on a new intensity. "Sarah, we need to get you to Denver International. I'm going to guide you through the approach and landing. Emma, you'll be my co-pilot monitoring everything." Denver Center cleared all runways, giving Flight 447 priority approach to runway 34R with perfect weather conditions. When Sarah acknowledged the instructions with professional precision, ground control asked in amazement, "Flight 447, are those children's voices we're hearing?" Emma took the radio, her young voice carrying across the airwaves. "Yes, sir. We're 8 years old, but our daddy taught us how to fly. We're going to land this plane safely." The silence that followed was filled with emotion, before ground control responded with a voice thick with feeling. "Roger that, Flight 447. You two are the bravest pilots we've ever worked with. We're going to get you home." The descent began under Captain Mitchell's careful guidance. "Girls, I need you to start your descent. Set altitude to 15,000 feet in the altitude window and press the altitude select button." Sarah's small hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the controls as the plane began a controlled descent. Beginning descent to 15,000 feet. Rate of descent 1,500 feet per minute, she reported with the professionalism of a veteran pilot. "Perfect technique, Angel," her father's voice praised. "Emma, monitor the airspeed. We want to maintain 280 knots during descent." Emma's eyes never left the instruments, airspeed 280 knots and holding steady. Throughout the cabin, flight attendants prepared for an emergency landing while passengers watched in awe as two children performed what seemed impossible. As they descended through 15,000 feet, Denver Approach contacted them. "Flight 447, turn left heading 060, descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Sarah acknowledged and executed the turn with textbook precision. The city of Denver spread out below them, the airport clearly visible in the distance. "Beautiful work, Sarah," Captain Mitchell praised. "Now, Emma, we need to configure for landing. See the gear lever on the center pedestal?" Emma pointed to the appropriate control, the big lever with the wheel symbol. Her father confirmed but cautioned, "That's it. But not yet. First, we need to slow down and extend flaps." The approach continued with methodical precision as the twins followed their father's guidance step by step. Denver Approach vectored them closer. "Flight 447, reduce speed to 210 knots, turn right heading 120. You're 15 miles from the airport." Sarah acknowledged and executed the instructions flawlessly. Her father guided them through the next phase. "Now, Sarah, extend flaps to position 5. The flap lever is on your right." The plane shuddered slightly as the flaps deployed and Sarah reported, "Flaps 5. Airspeed decreasing through 230 knots. Emma continued her monitoring duties with impressive focus. All engine parameters normal. Hydraulic pressure good. The passengers could feel the aircraft configuring for landing, and instead of fear, a sense of wonder filled the cabin. These two small children were accomplishing what seasoned pilots trained years to master. "Flight 447, you're doing beautifully," Denver Approach radioed. "Turn left heading 050, descend to 4,000 feet. You're cleared for approach to runway 34R. Sarah's response was crisp and professional. "Left turn 050, descending to 4,000, cleared approach runway 34R. As they descended through 6,000 feet, Captain Mitchell prepared them for the most critical phase. "Emma, it's time for landing gear. Pull the gear lever down." Emma reached for the large lever and pulled it down with both hands. The rumble of extending landing gear filled the cabin, and passengers felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft slowing and stabilizing. "Gear down and locked," Emma reported, checking the indicator lights. 3 green lights confirmed. The airport was now clearly visible ahead, growing larger by the minute. "Sarah, extend flaps to 30 degrees, Captain Mitchell instructed. "This will slow us down for final approach." Sarah moved the flap lever again, and the aircraft settled into its final configuration. The cabin was now completely silent except for the engines and the twins' comm communications with their father and air traffic control. Flight 447, you're 3 miles from the runway, Denver approach announced. Reduce speed to 150 knots. You're looking perfect on the approach. Sarah pulled back the throttles carefully, reducing to 150 knots. We have the runway in sight. Through the cockpit windows, the long concrete strip of runway 34 are stretched ahead of them like a lifeline. Captain Mitchell's voice was steady but filled with emotion. Okay, Angels, this is the hardest part. Sarah, I need you to disconnect the autopilot now. You're going to hand fly the landing. Sarah's small hand moved to the autopilot disconnect button. Autopilot disconnected, Dad. I have control. For the first time, the massive Boeing 737 was being flown entirely by an 8-year-old girl. The aircraft wobbled slightly as Sarah felt the full weight of manual control, but she quickly stabilized it. That's normal, Angel, her father reassured her. Feel the airplane. Let it talk to you. Emma called out airspeed and altitude, 150 knots, 1,500 feet, rate of descent 700 feet per minute. The runway was getting closer, and passengers could see emergency vehicles lined up along its edges. You're doing perfectly, Sarah, Captain Mitchell said. At 500 feet, I need you to start reducing power and raising the nose slightly for touchdown. Denver approach cleared them for landing. Flight 447, winds calm, cleared to land runway 34R. Emergency equipment is standing by. Sarah acknowledged while never taking her eyes off the runway, cleared to land 34R, flight 447. The ground rushed up to meet them. 500 feet, Emma called out. Power back, nose up slightly, Captain Mitchell instructed. Sarah eased back on the throttles and pulled the yoke toward her. The aircraft began to flare for landing, its nose rising as the main wheels prepared to touch down. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. Emma counted down. 50 feet, Sarah. Now ease back more on the yoke. Let the airplane settle onto the runway. The massive Boeing 737, guided by the steady hands of an 8-year-old girl, touched down on runway 34R with barely a bump. The main wheels kissed the concrete, followed moments later by the nose wheel. They were down. Spoilers up, Emma? Captain Mitchell called. Emma reached for the speed brake lever and pulled it up, deploying the spoilers that would help slow the aircraft. Sarah applied the wheel brakes carefully, just as her father had taught her countless times in the simulator. The aircraft slowed steadily as it rolled down the runway. Excellent, girls. Now turn off at the first taxiway, their father instructed. Sarah turned the aircraft off the runway and brought it to a complete stop on the taxiway. Flight 447 is safely on the ground, she announced into the radio, her voice finally showing a hint of the 8-year-old she truly was. The cabin erupted in applause and cheers. Passengers were crying, laughing, and hugging each other. Emergency medical personnel rushed aboard to tend to the pilots while the twins were surrounded by grateful passengers. Jessica knelt down and hugged both girls tightly. You saved us all. You're heroes. Denver Approach made an announcement that would be remembered in aviation history. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 447 has been successfully landed by 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell, with monitoring by her twin sister Emma. This is the youngest successful emergency landing on record. As paramedics worked to stabilize First Officer Chen and sadly confirmed Captain Torres' passing, the twins sat quietly together, holding hands. They had done exactly what their father had taught them, stayed calm, assessed the situation, and acted decisively. What they couldn't have known was that their incredible feat would inspire a new generation of young aviators and remind the world that heroes come in all sizes. Captain James Mitchell arrived at Denver International within hours, running across the tarmac to embrace his daughters. Through tears of pride and relief, he told reporters, I trained them to be pilots, but I never imagined they'd have to save 147 lives at 30,000 feet. They're my sky angels, and today they became everyone's angels. The story of Flight 447 became legend in aviation circles. The day 2 8-year-old girls took control of a Boeing 737 and brought it safely home. Sarah and Emma Mitchell had proven that courage, knowledge, and calm determination know no age limits. In a world that often seems full of disasters and despair, they reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest hands can perform the mightiest deeds. The Federal Aviation Administration later issued a special commendation to both girls, noting that their actions demonstrated extraordinary airmanship and composure under pressure that exceeded the performance of many seasoned professional pilots. The twins' flight manual, the one Sarah had clutched throughout the ordeal, was donated to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, where it serves as a testament to the power of preparation, education, and unshakable courage. Years later, when asked about that day, Sarah and Emma would always give the same answer: "Dad taught us that flying isn't about size or age, it's about knowledge, respect for the aircraft, and never giving up when people are counting on you." Flight 447 landed safely not because of luck or chance, but because two extraordinary young girls had been raised to understand that with great knowledge comes great responsibility, and sometimes the smallest pilots have the biggest hearts. The passengers of Flight 447 never forgot their sky angels, the twin girls in row 9 who turned what could have been aviation's greatest tragedy into its most inspiring triumph. In a world where heroes are often larger than life, Sarah and Emma Mitchell proved that sometimes the greatest heroes are exactly as tall as they need to be to reach the controls and save the day.